It was a quiet, misty morning in England, and the pale sun was just breaking over the horizon when young Alistair packed his bag and slipped out the back door. He was 17 and desperate for answers. Growing up in a small, remote town, Alistair often felt like his life was shrouded in the same haze that clung to the hills around his home. He wanted more than his quiet town could offer, and he wanted to understand what it meant to live a good life, not just to survive, but to thrive. He'd heard that answers to life's greatest questions could be found in the city of Oxford, in the mind of one of the greatest thinkers of his time, Bertrand Russell. Russell was a philosopher known for challenging the conventions of society, for advocating for peace, and for his unyielding search for truth. Rumor had it that if anyone could give Alistair the answers he sought, it was him. With a heart full of hope and a worn-out notebook tucked in his pocket, Alistair set off on his journey to meet the legendary philosopher. A meeting with skepticism. The soft hum of Oxford on a cool autumn day filled Alistair with nervous energy. Students bustled around him, some immersed in textbooks, others locked in quiet, intense debates about topics he could only imagine. He felt like an outsider, a stranger stepping into a world of thinkers and intellectuals, a world he longed to be part of. After some direction from a librarian, he found himself standing outside a small, dimly lit study with tall windows overlooking a grassy courtyard. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of old leather-bound books and polished wood. He took a hesitant breath, knocking gently on the heavy oak door. A moment later, he was face to face with Bertrand Russell, who, despite his silver hair and lined face, radiated a striking intensity. Russell looked up from his reading, a twinkle of curiosity in his sharp blue eyes as he took in the sight of Alistair, young, eager, a little unsure of himself. "Good afternoon," Alistair managed, clutching his notebook so tightly that his knuckles whitened. I've come for guidance." Russell raised an eyebrow, then nodded toward a worn leather armchair opposite him, inviting Alistair to sit. For a moment, there was silence as Alistair gathered the courage to speak. "What kind of guidance are you looking for?" Russell's voice was calm, resonant, each word carrying the weight of a lifetime spent exploring ideas. Alistair took a shaky breath. "I want to understand life better. I want to know how to live meaningfully. And how to find the truth." Russell considered him, his eyes narrowing slightly, as if gauging Alistair's sincerity. "And are you prepared to question everything you think you know?" he asked, a subtle challenge in his tone. Alistair blinked, not quite understanding. "What do you mean?" "Skepticism, my young friend," Russell said, leaning back in his chair. "If you truly wish to understand life, you must first learn to be skeptical. This doesn't mean denying everything you hear, but rather holding each belief lightly, willing to examine and, if necessary, discard it." "Skepticism," Alistair repeated, frowning. "But don't we need beliefs to guide us?" "Beliefs, yes," Russell agreed, "but beliefs formed through questioning, not inherited from others. Think of skepticism as a way of keeping the mind open. It prevents us from blindly following what's popular or convenient. Without skepticism, we become trapped by ideas that may not be our own, but rather society's ideas imposed upon us." Russell's words made Alistair uncomfortable. He had grown up in a small, traditional town, where beliefs were passed down from one generation to the next, rarely questioned. The idea that he should hold beliefs lightly felt almost rebellious. "So, how does one live with skepticism?" Alistair asked tentatively, wondering if this approach would make him feel aimless, lost. Russell's face softened. "It's not about living without conviction. Rather, It's about embracing the journey of seeking truth with humility and courage. Don't assume that your beliefs are absolute. Instead, question them, refine them. Skepticism is a tool that frees you to explore different perspectives, to remain curious instead of becoming complacent. Alistair nodded slowly, scribbling notes in his journal. He thought back to times when he'd been so certain of his opinions, only to feel crushed when they didn't hold up. Maybe, he thought, skepticism could be a way to protect himself from disappointment. Reading his thoughts, Russell smiled faintly. Skepticism isn't a shield from pain, Alistair. Rather, it's a bridge to understanding. To question deeply, to wonder honestly, these things are not easy, but they lead to wisdom. To live skeptically is to accept that life is full of uncertainties and to find peace within that mystery. As he spoke, Alistair felt a flicker of excitement, a thrill at the idea of exploring life in such an open, unbound way. He didn't need to cling to certainties, he could let himself be free to question, to think independently. Russell's voice broke his reverie. Remember, skepticism is the foundation. Without it, the rest crumbles. If you can keep your mind open, question with humility, then you've taken the first step toward wisdom. The sun dipped low in the sky, casting a golden glow through the window. Russell's study felt less intimidating now, like a sanctuary of sorts, where he could lay down his certainties and embrace a life of questioning. For the first time, Alistair understood what it meant to be a seeker, to be someone unafraid of doubt, someone who saw questions as gifts rather than threats. He left Russell's study that evening with a lighter heart and a head full of questions, ready to confront the world with a new, unyielding curiosity. The pursuit of knowledge. Alistair returned to Russell's study week after week, each session opening his eyes to new ideas and perspectives. Russell had an uncanny way of taking concepts that felt abstract, ethics, metaphysics, the nature of reality, and turning them into gripping conversations. One evening, Russell handed Alistair a stack of books, titles spanning history, philosophy, mathematics, and art. Why so many subjects? Alistair asked, slightly overwhelmed. Because knowledge isn't confined to one field, Russell replied with a knowing smile. To understand the world, you must approach it from multiple angles. Each discipline offers a piece of the puzzle. Alistair nodded, thinking back to the limited perspectives he'd encountered in his hometown. Here was a chance to see beyond his upbringing, to stretch his mind and embrace the complexity of life. As Alistair delved into the books, he discovered worlds he'd never imagined. The pages were filled with stories of human struggles, triumphs, theories, and discoveries. Each book left him wanting more, each question leading to another. One evening, after finishing a text on Greek philosophy, Alistair asked Russell, "What's the purpose of all this learning if life is still filled with suffering and uncertainty?" Russell paused, his gaze thoughtful. Knowledge may not remove suffering, but it illuminates the path through it. The more you know, the better you understand life's intricacies. It broadens your perspective, helps you connect the dots, and equips you to navigate your own journey. Alistair listened intently. So, knowledge isn't just about facts. Russell shook his head. No, my boy. It's about understanding. Knowledge allows us to step outside ourselves and see life as part of a greater whole. It teaches us empathy, resilience, patience. Knowledge transforms the mind, and when the mind transforms, so does life. Alistair's heart filled with resolve. In that moment, he realized he didn't want easy answers. He wanted understanding, a deeper, truer comprehension of life that only came through learning, questioning, and challenging his own perceptions. He continued his studies with renewed vigor, his once limited view of the world expanding like the horizon before a traveler setting out on an endless journey. Love and human connection. Months had passed, and Alastair had devoured every book Russell had given him. His mind felt sharper, clearer, but he couldn't shake a persistent feeling of loneliness. Knowledge, he realized, was not enough on its own. It was a tool, but it didn't fill the emptiness in his heart. One day, sensing Alastair's struggle, Russell shifted their discussion to a topic he rarely spoke about openly: love. "Alastair, there's something I haven't emphasized enough," he began, his tone softer than usual. "To live well, you must cultivate love, genuine connection to others." "But isn't love risky?" Alastair asked, thinking of his own past heartaches. "Yes, it is," Russell admitted, his eyes distant. "Love makes us vulnerable, opens us to pain. But it also opens us to joy, to understanding, to true empathy. Without love, knowledge can become cold, isolated. Love is what binds us, makes us human." Alastair nodded, feeling the truth of these words sink into him. Love was the warmth, the light that gave meaning to everything else. Over time, he began to reach out more, to foster friendships and connections with people he would have once overlooked. He found himself more patient, more forgiving, realizing that every person held a world of thoughts, struggles, and dreams within them. Through love, he discovered a depth to life he hadn't known was possible. It wasn't just knowledge that illuminated his path, it was the warmth of human connection, the understanding that he was part of a greater whole, held together by threads of empathy and kindness. Passion and detachment. The seasons shifted, and as spring blossomed in Oxford, Alastair found himself increasingly engrossed in his studies and ambitions. He was passionate, diving into philosophy with an intensity that often left him exhausted but fulfilled. Yet with that intensity came a gnawing sense of pressure, the fear that he might not live up to his expectations or those of the mentors he admired. Russell noticed Alastair's growing restlessness and invited him for a walk one morning through the gardens near his study. The cherry blossoms were in full bloom, painting the path with shades of pink and white. "Alastair, you seem troubled," Russell began, observing his young friend's furrowed brow. Alastair sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I just feel so much pressure to succeed. It's as if my passion is turning into something that controls me. I can't stop thinking about it." Russell nodded knowingly, gesturing to the blossoming trees around them. "Do you see these flowers? They don't worry about how long they'll bloom, nor do they question their purpose. They simply grow, reaching toward the sun." Alastair listened, not fully grasping the point. "But I'm not a flower. I want to achieve something, to make a difference. Doesn't that require focus and ambition?" Russell chuckled. "Yes, passion is essential. But when we become too attached to outcomes, our desires start to own us. Life is fleeting, Alastair. You can pursue your goals wholeheartedly, but you must learn to let go of the need for specific results. If you're too attached to achieving something specific, you risk missing the beauty of the journey itself." The words struck a chord. Alastair had been so fixated on his studies, on proving himself, that he had lost sight of the joy that had first drawn him to philosophy. Russell was right, he had become a slave to his ambitions. "Think of it like this," Russell continued. "Let your passion fuel you, but let go of the need to control the outcome. Work toward your dreams, but don't let your happiness depend on their success. Detachment isn't about giving up, it's about freeing yourself from the fear of failure." As they walked, Alastair took a deep breath, allowing the lesson to sink in. He looked at the cherry blossoms with new appreciation. Maybe, he thought, he could let himself bloom, too, without obsessing over where he would end up. The call for justice. Alistair's studies had deepened his understanding of the world, opening his eyes to the inequalities and injustices that plagued society. He had always been empathetic, but now, with the lens of philosophy, he saw the world suffering with a clarity that both troubled and motivated him. One day, he came to Russell, his heart heavy after witnessing the struggles of the less fortunate in his town. "Mr. Russell," he began, "isn't it enough just to live a good life? Must we also carry the burden of the world's suffering?" Russell leaned back in his chair, his gaze contemplative. "Alistair, a good life isn't lived in isolation. We are all part of a larger society, connected by invisible threads. If we are aware of suffering and do nothing, we become part of the problem." "But I feel so small," Alistair admitted, his voice full of frustration. "How can one person make a difference?" Russell smiled kindly. "You don't need to solve everything. But you do have a responsibility to act where you can. Whether it's through speaking out, helping those in need, or simply refusing to be silent in the face of injustice. We may not be able to change the world alone, but each act of kindness, each stand for justice, is a ripple in the fabric of society." Alistair felt a flicker of hope, inspired by Russell's words. He realized that doing nothing was a choice, and that he could choose differently. Over the next few months, he became more involved in his community, volunteering at local shelters, speaking up against injustices he saw, and encouraging others to do the same. Each act, no matter how small, felt meaningful, a step toward creating the world he wanted to live in. Through these actions, Alistair began to see himself not only as a seeker of wisdom but as a participant in the shared struggle for a just and compassionate world. Embracing uncertainty and finding wonder. One summer afternoon, Russell invited Alistair to a quiet spot by the river. The air was warm, filled with the sound of birdsong and the soft murmur of water. It was their last meeting before Alistair would leave Oxford, carrying Russell's lessons with him into the world. They sat together on the riverbank, Russell looking out over the water with a peaceful expression. Alistair felt a bittersweet ache, knowing this chapter of his life was coming to an end. "Alistair," Russell began, his voice gentle, "we've spoken of many things, of knowledge, love, passion, justice. But there's one final lesson I want you to carry with you." Alistair leaned in, sensing the gravity of the moment. "Life is uncertain," Russell continued. "No matter how much you learn, how much you plan, there will always be mysteries, unanswered questions, and unexpected turns. The world is too vast, too complex, to be fully understood. But therein lies its beauty." Alistair thought about the uncertainties he faced, his future, the unpredictability of life beyond the walls of Oxford. He had often felt anxious about the unknown, craving control and certainty. "But how can I find peace in not knowing?" he asked, voicing the question that had lingered in his mind. Russell's eyes softened. "By embracing it. Wonder and uncertainty go hand in hand. When you let go of the need to know everything, you open yourself to the awe and mystery of existence. Life is not a puzzle to be solved but a mystery to be lived." They sat in silence for a while, watching the sun glint off the river, casting patterns on the water's surface. Alistair began to feel a quiet acceptance, a sense that perhaps he didn't need all the answers, that perhaps the questions, the uncertainties, were gifts in themselves. As he left Oxford that evening, Alistair felt a new peace within him. He carried Russell's lessons like precious stones, each one a piece of wisdom that would guide him in the days to come. He knew he would face challenges, doubts, and fears, but he was ready to embrace them all, to live with curiosity, love, and wonder. And as he walked away, the world felt wide open, vast and beautiful, a mystery waiting to be explored. Epilogue: a life inspired by Russell's teachings. Years later, Alasdair found himself standing at a lectern, addressing a group of students. He had traveled far since his days at Oxford, but the lessons he had learned from Bertrand Russell remained the bedrock of his life. He looked out at the young faces before him, each one filled with the same eagerness and uncertainty he had once felt. Taking a deep breath, he began to share Russell's teachings, weaving them into stories, passing on the wisdom that had transformed him. "Question everything," he told them, echoing Russell's words. "Let your mind remain open, skeptical, but full of curiosity. Seek knowledge, but never forget the warmth of human connection. Pursue your passions, but don't let them control you. Stand for justice, for compassion, and learn to embrace the mystery of life." As he spoke, he saw the same flicker of curiosity light up in his students' eyes, the same spark that had led him, all those years ago, to knock on a philosopher's door. In that moment, Alasdair knew that Russell's legacy would live on, not only in books or lectures but in every life it touched, every soul it inspired. And as he finished his talk, he felt a deep gratitude for the journey he had taken, a journey of questions, of love, of growth, and of wonder.